So the other day, a friend of mine asked me, "Hey Caxt, how do you construct emotionally cathartic experiences through level design? And what is your process for user testing to confirm that your cues trigger what was intended?" I said, "That's easy. Put a dead puppy in your level and players will feel something, which would be the extent of my intention, and thus I've satisfied the criteria of the question." Of course, that's a facetious answer, but there are a couple of takeaways from it nonetheless. First, emotions are easy. It's restraint and delicacy that is the challenge. The second lesson is that it's a fool's errand to try and control a person's emotions. Level design is a form of communication, and in communication, a message is encrypted, transmitted from one person to another, and then unpackaged. We can do our best to preserve our original intent with how we wrap up our message and send it to someone, but ultimately, other people are going to have different life experiences through which they'll interpret your level. But hold up. Let's back up a second to make sure we're all talking apples here. The question of what is level design is a complicated one, but to get us on the same page, I'll give an oversimplified answer here. A level is a space that facilitates some kind of progression. Progression might be logistical, sure, but it can also mean through a game's narrative. Even a sandbox level facilitates progression through a game's systems, whether that's crafting, survival, or powering up your character's abilities. So level design can then be described as the elegance with which a space contributes to a player's progression through an experience. With this in mind, we can think about what we want progression to mean for our players. In an RPG, progression probably means a power fantasy. So the simple question is, how does our level make the player feel strong? In a horror game, progression might mean being afraid, so the question becomes, how does the level make the player feel uncomfortable? The key difference between a beginner level designer and an expert is the understanding that these feelings are usually best served progressively. In other words, we can think about a level in the context of the question, how does the level take the player from a place of weakness to a place of strength? Or how does the level take the player from a place of comfort to a place of fear? The stepping stone between expert and master is when a level designer can not only move one direction, but they can turn around and go back, pause, jump around, and do so with intention. Still, it isn't worth worrying about a player's emotional response as some kind of absolute. Your horror game might make some players feel afraid, sure, but it can make others feel lonely, or sad, or disgusted. Maybe your player is just a pervert and they're having themselves a great time. I don't think this implies some failure on the part of the level designer. All we can do is measure the progression of the intensity of the emotional cues throughout the level, and confirm if they match the designer's intent. As far as evaluating emotional cues goes, I'd suggest that we have two primary tools here: situational cues and cultural cues. Cultural cues will work in a vacuum for the right audience. We all know how dead puppies are going to make us feel, just like we know how pulling a sword out of the stone is going to make us feel. Situational cues require a little bit more legwork on the part of the designer. When you learn about what John Wick's puppy means to him as a symbol of his late wife, it makes the approaching trauma all the more impactful. Setups and payoffs. The meaning is dependent on what the player has experienced in your game before. In most cases, you're going to want to strike some kind of a balance between these two types of cues. Relying on tropes isn't a bad thing when done in moderation, and too many situational cues can be exhausting for your player to remember between play sessions. So don't fill your levels with dead puppies, kids. Use them sparingly, as a tool to escalate the emotional intensity of your experience.